The death of an American ambassador as the Arab Spring threatens to turn into an autumn of discontent.
We've seen rage and violence over an awful internet video.
Did the administration have any sort of heads up?
And this is a matter that's under investigation.
They panicked.
Can you speak with us briefly about the attack in Benghazi?
This is not an appropriate time.
We are in a stronger position today than we were 4 years ago.
Does the Obama administration have a problem calling the threat by its name?
The suggestion that anybody in my team would play politics or mislead is offensive.
Could you have protected Ambassador Stevens?
Special Report investigates death and deceit in Benghazi. From Washington, D.C., here is Bret Baier.
It looked like this election was all about the economy. But that changed when terrorists murdered 4 Americans at the United States consulate in Benghazi, Libya, on the anniversary of 9/11. Americans had questions. Who did this and how? Should our government have seen it coming? Did President Obama try to hide the truth? Is this a huge scandal that exposes a failed Obama foreign policy? Or is Mitt Romney just saying it is? Tonight, we'll try to give you answers. We'll walk you step by step through the terror that unfolded that day, and we'll break down the political maneuvering that's followed. But we begin with a series of frightening developments and troubling decisions leading up to that horrific night in Benghazi. It's a story you haven't heard, told by a man who tried to prevent what happened on September 11th, 2012. Did you have a close relationship with Ambassador Stevens?
I lived and worked with him.
Begin with a series of frightening developments and troubling decisions leading up to that horrific night in Benghazi. It's a story you haven't heard, told by a man who tried to prevent what happened on September 11th, 2012. Did you have a close relationship with Ambassador Stevens?
I lived and worked with him for about 2 months when he came on there till the time I left, yes.
No one understands more than Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Wood the full extent of the fiasco that killed Stevens. He worked closely with Stevens for 6 months in Libya before his violent death. A 24-year U.S. Special Forces veteran, Wood's job was to try to prevent such an attack from occurring. Is there a side of this that makes you mad?
That was my first reaction when I heard that Ambassador Stevens had been killed. I was angry.
Why have you come forward?
I was at the hub of everything that was going on there. Some of that information needs to come forward.
We begin our story, however, in the winter of 2011, a year before Wood arrives in Libya. Colonel Muammar Gaddafi is still in power in Tripoli, but rebels, protected by U.S. air power, are gaining control over much of Libya. February 25th, the U.S. State Department withdraws all its personnel from the capital. But 6 weeks later, April 5th, 2011, it sends Stevens with a 12-man team by chartered boat to Benghazi, now under rebel control. As special representative to the rebels, Stevens set up shop in the Tibesti Hotel. June 1st, 2011, a car bomb explodes in the parking lot in front of that hotel. Stevens and his team decide it's too dangerous to stay there. In August, Stevens and his team settle on a compound on the west side of the city.
It was rented from an owner who had a nice villa there and several other outbuildings as well.
But not a lot of security.
Like in any residence, they're not a fortress.
Inside the walls are 4 buildings. One is essentially a large residence with a number of bedrooms in it. Another residence has a cantina where the staff eats. Just across the way is what they call their Tactical Operations Center, filled with offices for security staff, phones, and security monitors. Finally, the barracks, a small house by the main gate of the compound. It will house a Libyan security force. Sirte, Libya, October 20th, 2011. Colonel Gaddafi is captured and killed by rebels in his hometown.
Revolutions and wars don't just end. The killing goes on. Old scores are being settled, so sometimes there was revenge killings, things going back and forth. So there was still fighting going on.
With Gaddafi gone, Ambassador Stevens will spend much of his time at the main U.S. Embassy building in Tripoli. But he'll come to Benghazi often. The State Department upgrades the physical security at that property.
We extended the height of the outer wall.
Charlene Lamb of the State Department.
Masonry concrete, barbed wire, and concertina razor wire.
Finally, inside the large residence, a fortified safe haven is built. You enter through a heavy metal grill with several locks on it. Tell me about this safe haven.
Simply bars on windows, bars on the wall. You're building a jail cell, basically. You're going to get inside, and it's a delay until you can get some relief to get out of there.
Security on the compound consists of 5 diplomatic security special agents and 4 members of the Libyan government security force called the 17th February Brigade. Former UN Ambassador John Bolton.
Well, it is the responsibility of host governments to provide for security for all diplomatic establishments within their territory. But from the U.S. point of view, we have to recognize that some countries are better able to do that than others. And when you're in a high-threat environment, we have to do what's necessary to protect our personnel on the ground.
There is more security at what's called the Annex, a mile away. Based in Tripoli, but moving around the country, is a Department of Defense site security team. February 12, 2012, Lieutenant Colonel Wood, who joined the Utah National Guard after his 2+ decades in U.S. Special Forces, arrives in Libya as the new commander of the SST. It had 16 members?
Yes.
What exactly did they all do?
The site security team was special operations soldiers that had extra skills and capabilities they could bring to the embassy.
Could a team that small really make a difference?
The caliber of individuals on that team were the best in the United States inventory. Yeah, they can make a difference in any firefight.
The problem, however, is that SST is slated to end its tour in Libya by summer's end, and the security situation is taking an ominous turn. Spring of 2012, there was an uptick in terror attacks in Libya. Is that right?
That's true. I think the nature of things started to change. When I first got on the ground, it was a lot of lawlessness going back and forth. As things progressed, the commotion settled down a little bit, but the targeted attacks seemed to pick up, and they seemed to be targeting more toward Westerners.
April 6, 2012, a bomb is tossed over the wall of the Benghazi compound. June 6, 2012, an IED is placed on the compound's north gate. No one is injured in either incident. That's not the case 5 days later. June 11th, 2012. A convoy transporting Great Britain's ambassador, Sir Dominic Asquith, is ambushed in Benghazi. He isn't hurt, but 2 of his security aides are. Clear that was a terrorist attack.
I actually conducted an investigation a couple of days afterwards, walked the ground, took photographs, examined the vehicle. So they knew what they were doing, and it was definitely an assassination attempt by skilled operators. But as I could see it, I could see the adversary growing stronger, and we were the last thing on their target list.
In the past year, there have been more than 230 security incidents in Libya. What's apparent to Wood is that terrorists are working on increasingly bigger plots.
I had seen instances occur prior to that. For example, with the other bombings, you know, I saw a series of things going on that it appeared to me that they were building toward, you know, additional attacks.
That's why Wood and Eric Nordstrom, the regional security officer, implored the State Department to keep Wood's SST force in Libya beyond its scheduled August departure.
We weren't requesting additional security. We were requesting to keep the security that we had, and that was being taken away.
So you want to keep your team on the ground, the team that was in place already?
Yeah, and my team was only a small part. There was MSD, State Department MSD.
That stands for Mobile Security Detachment Team.
A lot of those are ex-Green Berets, ex-Navy SEALs, excellently trained folks. There was 3 MSD teams when I got on the ground there.
August 5th, 2012. The State Department decides not to keep the SST in Libya, and the MSD team is being reduced as well. So who opposed the request?
Charlene Lamb. She denied those requests or ignored them or just didn't fill them in cases.
Why is that? Why is that?
Because
you knew about all these other attacks that had taken place. It had been 12, 14.
we had been training local Libyans and arming them
Well, now,
for almost a
okay,
year.
well, let me just interrupt.
Why do you think this request was denied?
I don't know. I really don't know. In the case of the SST, that was provided then by DOD. The State Department didn't have to pay money for that. I can't imagine why. I can't fill in that blank. That's part of what was trying to come out in the congressional investigations.
I mean, were you just flabbergasted that, like, what can we do?
We couldn't even keep what we had.
I think that what was motivating the State Department was that if we had security that would have truly been appropriate, it would have been an admission that conditions on the ground in Libya were not safe. And that would have violated the worldview that this had been an administration success.
You left Libya in August, less than a month before the attack.
August 14th.
How did you feel about the security situation when you left?
I didn't like it. And I said as much. And my concerns were specifically for Benghazi.
September 10th, 2012. Ambassador Chris Stevens arrives in Benghazi for a full day of meetings beginning the next morning. His first trip there since Wood's security team left the country. Going to a dangerous place like Benghazi.
Yes.
But he knew it, didn't he?
Yes, he knew. And he went anyway. Because I think in his heart, mission came first.
September 11th, 2012. A mob gathers at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo, Egypt, then scales the walls and burns the American flag. The explanation is that they're angry over an obscure anti-Islam video produced in California. Meanwhile, something else is going on in Benghazi. At about 5 p.m. Eastern Time, the first reports about an attack come across the wire. It won't be until morning, however, until America learns how serious that is.
We weren't there. We just weren't there.
And if you were, could you have protected Ambassador Stevens?
Well, the more guns you have in a firefight, the better chance you have of winning.
When we return, Special Report Investigates is on the scene in Benghazi. What happened that night? Greg Palcott has the story of heroism and disaster. The details are still coming out about what happened in Benghazi on September 11th. In off-camera briefings, in congressional hearings, Special Report has investigated as well. Greg Palcott took that information and went to Benghazi himself. There he talked to eyewitnesses and scoured the abandoned compound for additional clues. Now he pulls it all together and walks you through a timeline of terror you won't soon forget.
September 11th, 2012, morning. The U.S. Ambassador to Libya, Chris Stevens, has a full day of meetings ahead of him. But since it's the 11th anniversary of the al-Qaeda attacks, he schedules all of them out of caution behind the perceived safety of the U.S. mission walls in Benghazi. 7:30 p.m. Stevens takes his last meeting in the large residence building with the Turkish consul general. It ends after an hour. 8:30 p.m. Stevens escorts the diplomat to the main gate. He makes small talk in Arabic to the guards and returns inside.
At this point, outside the main gate of the compound, on the other side of the U.S. mission walls in this Benghazi neighborhood, all is quiet. No stirrings of any protest, no sign of the real hell about to unfold.
In fact, the ambassador decides to turn in for the night. 9 p.m. Still no sign of any kind of spontaneous demonstration over that web video. A protest the Obama administration would later suggest escalated into a deadly riot. Joining Stevens in the main residence building is Information Management Officer Sean Smith and 4 diplomatic security special agents. Another agent is at the nearby Tactical Operations Center. All these agents are armed with pistols. 9:40 p.m. This amateur video apparently captures the first movement outside the compound.
The mad mob of attackers break through here, the main gate, a weak point in the defense of the mission. And then they move on here to the understaffed Libya militia barracks. They storm the place. They torch it. They light up embassy cars around it, and then they move on.
According to eyewitnesses, the fighters are well armed and organized, flying the radical Islamist flag, some with foreign accents. The agent in the operations center sees in monitors scores of men pouring into the compound.
A diplomatic security agent working in the Tactical Operations Center, immediately activated the imminent danger notification system.
State Department official Charlene Lamb was working that night in Washington, and so she could follow the events in real time.
He also alerted the quick reaction security team stationed nearby, the Libyan 17th February Brigade, the embassy in Tripoli, and the Diplomatic Security Command Center in Washington.
Back here in the main residence, the special agent, reportedly David Ubben, comes here and gets Ambassador Stevens from his bedroom and brings him, along with Sean Smith, to this room in the safe haven. Really, aside from some medicine and other supplies, a big, dark, windowless closet. And then, outside, a locked gate. Hope for security.
Ubben radios the others in the compound to say they are fine. The other security agents are scrambling amidst the gunfire and explosions, gathering up their machine guns, body armor, and ammunition from the other buildings. As two of them head back to the main residence, they're cut off by a large group of armed men. They decide to go back and barricade themselves in.
At this point, there are 7 Americans at 3 different locations. Ambassador Stevens and 2 others in the main residence, 2 special agents at the second residence and cafeteria, and then here in the Tactical Operations Center, 2 more agents. Attackers all around.
One group penetrates the small residence. The attackers, however, don't get to the agents, and they eventually leave.
Inside the main residence, it is a different story. Attackers come in here and they ransack the place, and then they go for the locked gate. They look inside. It's dark. They can't see anything. And then they try the lock. They can't open it up. Inside, Agent Ubben has got a gun trained on them, ready to shoot if need be.
But, as Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Wood says, the safe haven is only safe for a short time.
It's a delay for an aggressor, but it has to rely on someone to come in to rescue him as well.
That someone, Wood says, might have been his elite site security team, but they've been pulled out of the country. Either way, Stevens, Smith, and Ubben were trapped by diabolical killers who pour diesel fuel around the house, light it, and leave.
When we come back, the trapped Americans tried desperately to escape. Before the break, Greg Palcott told you how terrorists overran the U.S. consulate compound in Benghazi, Libya. A handful of Americans caught by surprise, pinned down in 3 different locations. 3 of those people, including Ambassador Chris Stevens, have locked themselves in a so-called safe haven constructed in one of those buildings. The attackers can't break in, so they've set the place ablaze. Once again, from Benghazi, here's Greg Palcott.
September 11th, around 10 p.m. The entire safe haven, which takes up part of the first floor of the main residence, is black with thick smoke and fumes. Ambassador Stevens, Sean Smith, and David Ubben move to a bathroom within the safe area, which has a window. They try to open it, but it doesn't help. There's just too much smoke. They drop to the floor, trying to get air, but even down there, they can't breathe. So they decide to leave the safe haven and take their chances with the armed attackers who have taken over the U.S. compound. Fighting the heat and smoke, they find another window grill they can open.
This is the window that Special Agent Ubben jimmies open and crawls out of, but Stevens and Smith do not crawl out after him. And so, even though he can barely see, barely breathe, he goes back in. In fact, he goes back in and out several times. He can't find them, and he is overcome with smoke.
Ubben struggles up a small ladder to the roof of the building and collapses. He radios the other agents. Another U.S. agent in full combat gear emerges from the Tactical Operations Center. Throwing a smoke grenade to hide his movements, he moves to the small residence and gets the 2 agents holed up there out. The 3 then get into an armored vehicle parked nearby and drive the short distance to the large residence. Taking turns, they crawl into the residence on their hands and knees, feeling their way through the building to try to find their 2 colleagues. They find Smith. They pull him out of the building. He's dead. Now remember, the crack site security team is gone, but there's a small unit of security at the annex a mile away. 6 Americans and 16 from the Libyan militia arrive. Some surround the compound. The others go in. They're unable to find Stevens. By 11, the Libyan forces say they can no longer hold the perimeter. The American agents carrying Smith's body pile into an armored vehicle and exit the main gate. They head for the annex about a mile away. The crowd fires upon them and throws 2 grenades under their vehicle. They take direct fire from AK-47s from about 2 feet away. Despite 2 flat tires and heavy damage to their vehicle, they keep rolling. Several blocks away, they hit more traffic in a busy Benghazi neighborhood. The car careens over the middle divider, pushes forward against opposing traffic, and finally makes it to the annex and again hoped for safety. Sometime after midnight, back at the mission, looters enter the building and find the body of Stevens slumped on the floor. Although they don't know who he is, they drag him out through a window. His eyes are dazed, his face smoke-stained, seemingly lifeless. When someone says he's breathing, the crowd is relieved and cheer. Allah Akbar, God is great.
Around 1 a.m., Ambassador Stevens is brought by car here to the Benghazi Medical Center, where doctors try desperately to resuscitate him for some 45 minutes. They fail. He dies of severe asphyxiation.
Back at the annex, the battle is on again. Fighters hitting the place with AK-47 fire and rocket-propelled grenades, forcing those inside to retreat to a building further back in the annex compound. Sometime after 1:30 at the Benghazi airport, a team of reinforcements arrives from the U.S. Embassy in Tripoli. They make their way to the annex. According to reports, they were going into an ambush.
Around 4 a.m., this annex compound is hit by another wave of attacks. It is described as planned and precise. A round of mortar fire targeting the roof of a building set well behind this gate. That turns out to be dangerous and deadly.
Killed in that attack, 2 security personnel, Glenn Doherty, 42, and Tyrone Woods, 41, both former Navy SEALs. Badly injured, Special Agent David Ubben, the same man who struggled valiantly to save the lives of Ambassador Stevens and Information Manager Smith. The fighters are repelled. The annex, reportedly a base of operations for sensitive intelligence work tracking militants in eastern Libya, is secured, and a decision is made to evacuate the whole enterprise. 8:30 a.m. September 12th. The second plane leaves with the remaining Americans on board and the bodies of Ambassador Stevens, Smith, and Agents Doherty and Woods. It's less than a month since the military site security team left the country, to the regret of its commander, Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Wood, who says they would have made a difference.
It was the job of the SST to protect the ambassador should something like that happen. It was our job to defend the compound and engage those targets until he could be extracted.
Chris Stevens was the first U.S. ambassador killed on duty in more than 3 decades. September 11th, 2012 was a tragedy that will long be remembered. Then the story moved back to Washington. Was what followed the fog of war an attempted cover-up or something else? Special Report investigates after the break. The carnage in Benghazi is over. The story shifts to Washington. Here's Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry.
Since our founding, the United States has been a nation that respects all faiths. We reject all efforts to denigrate the religious beliefs of others.
September 12th, in the Rose Garden, President Obama seems to embrace an idea he and his top aides will advance more explicitly over the next 2 weeks, that Ambassador Chris Stevens and 3 other Americans were killed in a spontaneous riot over an anti-Mohammed internet video and not a planned attack. He does use the term terror, but only in a general sense, in the context of the September 11, 2001 al-Qaeda attacks.
No acts of terror will ever shake the resolve of this great nation, alter that character, or eclipse the light of the values that we stand for.
He gives an interview to CBS's 60 Minutes shortly thereafter. He says nothing that has happened has made him second-guess his policies in the Middle East since the Arab Spring.
I was pretty certain, and continue to be pretty certain, that there are going to be bumps in the road.
Because Nevada is a battleground state.
That afternoon, the president leaves for a campaign trip to Las Vegas.
The President of the United States did not postpone a campaign event, even though we had been hit.
I said at the time, I thought that that was the biggest political strategic mistake of the Obama campaign.
Dana Perino was the White House press secretary in George W. Bush's administration. She's now a Fox News host.
Just imagine if he would have said, as commander-in-chief, it is important for me to stay back here at the White House. Just imagine, everybody would have thought, wow, how responsible.
Once the president had made his statement, I'm not sure what he should have done.
Democrat Eleanor Holmes Norton represents the District of Columbia.
Are we supposed to sit in mourning for several days and not go about our daily business?
September 13th, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton suggests the attack was just a spontaneous demonstration about the anti-Islam video.
There is no justification, none at all, for responding to this video with violence.
Current White House Press Secretary Jay Carney says so flat out the next day.
These protests were in reaction to a video. We have no information to suggest that it was a pre-planned attack.
And later that day, when the President and Secretary of State greet the deceased at Joint Base Andrews, Clinton talks again about the video.
We've seen rage and violence directed at American embassies over an awful internet video that we had nothing to do with.
September 15th, California authorities haul Nakula Basili Nakula, the man who produced that video, in for questioning and marched him in front of TV cameras.
Do you have any regrets?
September 16th, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Susan Rice, goes on 5 Sunday talk shows, repeating the same story each time.
What happened initially was that it was a spontaneous reaction to what had just transpired in Cairo as a consequence of the video.
My reaction was, where's Secretary of State Hillary Clinton?
To John Bolton, who served as UN ambassador under George W. Bush, the choice of Rice is telling.
From my own experience, when you're a senior American official, you don't go on the Sunday talk shows unless you're the White House choice. So that to me is an indication that there were already internal difficulties within the administration, and that perhaps Secretary Clinton wasn't seen by the White House as the best spokesperson for what the administration wanted to say.
September 17th, the State Department.
Does the United States government regard what happened in Benghazi as an act of terror?
Again, I'm not going to put labels on this until we have a complete investigation, okay?
So you don't regard it as an act of terrorism?
I don't think we know enough. I don't think we know enough.
From my experience,
former Obama State Department spokesman P.J. Crowley.
First reports inevitably have information that is correct and information that may be misunderstood or incorrect.
They panicked. They panicked.
Former White House Chief of Staff John Sununu is now a senior advisor to Republican Mitt Romney's campaign.
This is purely a political reaction in a White House that had prepared itself to establish a narrative of a president getting rid of the threat of terrorism, using the death of bin Laden to focus on that, and waking up one morning and finding out that terrorism on 9/11 of this year was back full-fledged and even killing a U.S. ambassador.
I don't see a political agenda here. I see the fog of war. It's not about politics. It's about the difficult task of reconstructing what happened.
September 18th.
Did the administration have any sort of heads up that violence was increasing specifically in Libya before the attack?
I'm not aware of any, Ed. This is a matter that's under investigation in terms of what precipitated the attacks, what the motivations of the attackers were.
That night on The Late Show with David Letterman, the story seems to shift slightly. President Obama says the video did spark Muslim outrage, which terrorists then exploited to attack and kill Ambassador Stevens.
You had a video that was released by somebody who lives here, sort of a shadowy character. This caused great offense in much of the Muslim world. But what also happened was extremists and terrorists used this as an excuse to attack a variety of our embassies, including the consulate in Libya.
September 19th, Capitol Hill. The head of the National Counterterrorism Center testifies and plainly states what most everyone already knows.
I would say yes. They were killed in the course of a terrorist attack on our embassy.
September 24th, ABC's The View.
There's no doubt that the kind of weapons that were used, the ongoing assault, that it wasn't just a mob action.
The next day, September 25th, the president mentions the video 6 times at the United Nations.
There's no video that justifies an attack on an embassy.
October 8th, at a San Francisco fundraiser, President Obama pushes the idea the threat from al-Qaeda is waning.
And today, al-Qaeda is on its heels, and Osama bin Laden is no more.
Then, the next day, October 9th, the State Department provides off-camera a blow-by-blow account of the Benghazi attack. Reporters learned the compound was overwhelmed by an organized assault, fighters armed with machine guns, mortars, and possibly rocket-propelled grenades. October 10th, Congress holds a contentious hearing on the attack in Libya, and Americans learn that State Department officials, despite being warned of escalating attacks, refused to beef up security in Libya. The shocking revelations made the first question in the next night's vice presidential debate all but inevitable.
I would like to begin with Libya.
And turned questions about what really happened in Benghazi into one of the most heated issues of the presidential campaign.
Beyond the controversy over who said what are bigger issues. Next, Special Report investigates what Benghazi reveals about President Obama's foreign policy. Is it smart diplomacy or geopolitical correctness? Fox's chief intelligence correspondent Catherine Herridge asks, if you're reluctant to call terrorism by its name, can you ever defeat the terrorists?
We have no information to suggest that it was a pre-planned attack.
We've seen rage and violence directed at American embassies over an awful internet video.
It was a spontaneous reaction to what had just transpired in Cairo.
Does the Obama administration have a problem calling the threat by its name?
There's no question that they have avoided the use of the word terror.
Former Congressman Porter Goss was head of the CIA under President George W. Bush.
We can't ignore criminal acts. We can't ignore terrorist acts.
Goss says the risk of ignoring terrorism is especially high in a part of the world awash in lethal weapons, and Libya was just such a part of that world. Case in point, a mysterious Libyan ship picked up in Turkey on September 6th, just 5 days before Ambassador Chris Stevens, Information Management Officer Sean Smith, and former Navy SEALs Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty were killed during the extended terrorist assault in Benghazi. According to an initial September 14th report by the Times of London, 400 tons of cargo was on board, some of it humanitarian, and it was reportedly also holding a large consignment of weapons headed for Syria's rebels. The ship and its cargo are a huge warning sign that the situation on the ground in Libya is vastly more dangerous than even the State Department may have realized. Even before the well-organized massive attack in Benghazi that killed an ambassador who knew well the threat from al-Qaeda in the region was large and growing.
What do you think al-Qaeda looks like today, especially in North Africa?
It's much stronger. It's spreading out.
So there's no question in your mind that al-Qaeda is stronger in North Africa today than it was 4 years ago?
Oh, absolutely. We've got all kinds of new franchise operations.
The Benghazi attack and the administration's reaction to it suggests to Goss that this White House doesn't get it.
The problem is they're avoiding reality, and bad things happen when you avoid reality, and unfortunately we've just seen that.
We are in a stronger position today than we were 4 years ago.
P.J. Crowley, former United States Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs under President Obama, believes the president's anti-terror policies are paying off, particularly in places like Libya.
We've gone through a dramatic transition, called the Arab Spring. These transitions to democracy are a repudiation of everything that bin Laden stood for and tried to achieve, through violent means.
Crowley says you don't make Americans safer with words that inflame. You do it by winning over those we can work with.
We're at the stage where we need partnerships to solve any meaningful crisis around the world. The United States can never do that alone.
Do you believe that there are a lot of dead Americans as a result of this administration's refusal to call the threat what it is?
I do. Show signs of weakness. They take that as an opportunity and they will attack.
What did the president say, and when did he say it? That question is one of the most explosive in the presidential campaign. Could the election turn on the answer? After the break. The Benghazi terror attack, the White House response, the November election. Democrats accuse Republicans of gotcha politics. Republicans say this is an issue that cuts to the heart of the election. This much is certainly true. It's an issue that is not going away soon. By October, the Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney is regularly hitting President Obama hard on Libya.
The attack on our consulate can't be blamed on a reprehensible video insulting Islam, despite the administration's attempts to convince us of that for so long.
But Obama Deputy Campaign Manager Stephanie Cutter insists the only reason it's a political issue at all is because Romney and Ryan are making it one. October 11th, right before the vice presidential debate, I asked her if she really meant that.
What are you suggesting here? Are you suggesting that we're playing politics with this?
I'm not suggesting anything.
You
said that
you have to
the
concede.
entire reason this has become the political topic.
Right.
4 people are dead.
Absolutely. And this administration, let me just get my sentence out. This administration has treated this entire tragedy with the utmost seriousness. Now, at the same time that we're doing that, we have 2 people campaigning around the country accusing us of covering something up.
But in the vice presidential debate itself, moderator Martha Raddatz makes Libya her first question.
Wasn't this a massive intelligence failure, Vice President Biden?
What it was a tragedy, Martha. We will get to the bottom of it because whatever mistakes are made will not be made again.
Congressman Ryan.
What we are watching on our TV screens is the unraveling of the Obama foreign policy.
And they wanted more security there.
Well, we weren't told they wanted more security again. We did not know they wanted more security again.
Biden not only places the blame squarely on the State Department and the intelligence community, he also seems to flatly contradict what State Department officials have said under oath. That sends the administration backpedaling the next day, October 12th.
What the vice president said was that
we weren't told they wanted more security there, is what he said. That's a quote.
correct. And he is talking about.
He was never briefed. That's clear. He was never briefed that more security was needed.
There was.
Clearly, the White House is going to need a bus with, huge Truckosaurus-sized wheels for every element of the government that they're throwing under there.
Conservative author and commentator Mark Stein has written about Islamic terrorism for years.
They got the intelligence community under there. I mean, they've got the State Department under there.
Hi, Ambassador. Can you speak with us briefly about the attack in Benghazi?
This is not an appropriate time, but thanks for your interest.
But Rice's boss will crawl under that bus herself. On October 15th, Monday, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton says she takes responsibility for what happened in Benghazi.
I want to do everything I can to protect our people, and I also want to make sure that we track down whoever did this and bring them to justice.
Clinton's mea culpa comes a day before the second presidential debate, where the president, for the first time, takes responsibility too, then goes after Romney.
The day after the attack, Governor, I stood in the Rose Garden and I told the American people that this was an act of terror, and the suggestion that anybody in my team would play politics or mislead when we've lost 4 of our own, Governor, is offensive.
That set off an exchange that may go down as one of the most remarkable in the history of televised presidential debates.
You said in the Rose Garden, the day after the attack, it was an act of terror. It was not a spontaneous demonstration. Is that what you're saying?
Please proceed, Governor.
I want to make sure we get that for the record, because it took the president 14 days before he called the attack in Benghazi an act of terror.
Get the transcript.
He did, in fact, sir. So let me call it an act of terror.
Can you say that a little louder, Candy?
He did call it an act of terror.
Only after the debate does Crowley admit that maybe she was the one with her facts wrong. Syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer was part of Fox's debate coverage that night.
The next day she walked away from it, whereas her intervention on behalf of Obama was in front of 60, 70 million people who will remember that and not know anything about her walking away.
Then Thursday, October 18th, a report claims Secretary of State Clinton ordered security in Libya beefed up, a request that was never carried out. And just today, official State Department cables showing Ambassador Stevens was increasingly worried about al-Qaeda security threats in the weeks leading up to the Benghazi attack, and even cables signed by Stevens on September 11th, the day he was killed. More reasons for America to ask, who is ultimately responsible for leaving those Americans so vulnerable?
If it's the White House, this will be devastating.
But Mark Stein hopes the political post-mortem doesn't obscure the more frightening fact that terrorism may be back with a vengeance, and America is woefully unprepared.
But you know what's wicked about this, Bret, is that the real politicization here is the guys who actually only see this in terms of, you know, ooh, will it hurt us in Ohio? Might it cause us problems in Florida? This could go bad for Obama. Nuts to that. It's real bad for the United States because this is a humiliation for the United States. It's bad for Chris Stevens. It's bad for Sean Smith. It's bad for Glenn Doherty. It's bad for Tyrone Woods. They're dead. They're gone.
That's another reason I think I'm here, to give a voice to those who don't have a voice anymore.
Which brings us back to Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Wood, who saw the deadly debacle at Benghazi coming.
I can tell you're a little emotional about it. This is a ambassador who was killed, first one since 1979, and he was your friend.
I mean, it's a huge thing to have a loss like that. I grieve for his loss. I grieve for the loss that we suffer as a nation. It was our job to defend the compound.
Thank you, man.
I wish we could have been there.
The Benghazi attack staggered America. We now have another reason to mourn on 9/11 and a new unmistakable warning. The Islamic terrorists who brutalized our citizens in Libya were well-trained, well-armed killers intent on doing us great harm. The brave, beleaguered Americans in Libya knew that long before they died. The rest of us owe it to them to understand that too. That's our program. I'm Bret Baier. Thanks for watching.